Genshin's 4.3 updates will be a great opportunity to pull for some amazing returning characters, and of course, the main highlight will be the release of Navia. How's it going, everyone? This is Kay. Let's break down Navia's skills and see who you should pull for on this update. It's no secret that the Geo element has been heavily neglected. With the release of Navia, it does bring something unique to the element as she heavily focuses on crystallized reactions. Normal attack talent is a 4-hit combo, but the best combo to use would be 3 normals, dash, then 2 normals. This is important to remember as she will have a Geo Infusion ability. Navia's elemental skill is her primary kit as it deals tremendous damage and allows her to fulfill a sub DPS role. Essentially, you want to obtain bullet stacks in order to increase her skill's damage. To do so, you'll need to obtain elemental shards from crystallized reactions. Each shards will give 1 stack, and she can hold a max of 6 bullet stacks. Firing off her skill will consume all the bullets, and if she uses 3 stacks, it will unleash the max amount of shard shots, which will also double its base damage. Now, consuming between 4 to 6 stacks will further increase the skill's damage by 15% per bullet beyond the 3 initial stacks. So the goal is to fire off all 6 stacks. She does have 2 charges for her skill on a 9-second cooldown for each. Her skill will also trigger the Usia attack for additional damage. Now, you can tap the skill or hold it. Holding the skill will have her enter an aim mode, which will collect all elemental shards around the area. So after using her skill, Navia's A1 passive will infuse her attacks with Geo for 4 seconds. It's honestly not that long, but can certainly be used if you have spare time within your rotations. As said before, you want to use NA 3 times, dash, then NA twice, which takes about 4 seconds. A1 also increases her normal attacks by 40%. Her elemental burst is an auto-firing attack that will hit enemies with AoE Geo damage. The duration is 12 seconds, but most importantly, it'll give Navia a bullet stack once every 2.4 seconds, which will help speed up her charge process to unleash her max E skill. Not to mention, you'll also trigger crystallized reactions while the burst is ongoing, charging her bullet stacks even faster with shards. So her burst is very important for speed and consistency. Navia's A4 passive increases her attack by 20% for each Pyro, Electro, Cryo, or Hydro character you have on the team, with a max stack of 2. This means Navia is encouraged to be splashed into different elements instead of the traditional Geo mono build. This also leaves 1 slot open for the second Geo character, which provides Geo resonance. For constellations, at C1, for each bullet stack she consumes, it will restore 3 energy to herself with a max of 9 energy. It will also decrease her burst cooldown by 1 second per charge with a max of 3 second reduction. C2 will increase her E-skill's crit rate by 12% per stack consumed with a max of 36% crit rate. It will also fire off 1 cannon from her burst per skill use. At C4, when her burst attack hits, it'll debuff the enemy's Geo resistance by 20% for 8 seconds. And if you're rich enough to go all the way up to Constellation level 6, it'll increase the skill's crit damage by 45% per stack consumed. That's beyond the first 3. C6 will also refund any extra bullet stacks that were used beyond the 3. So this means if you fire her skill with 6 stacks, 3 stacks will be returned, which basically means you only consume 3 instead of all 6 bullets for maximum effect. Overall, C6 makes her skill even more powerful and faster to max out for repeated shots. Navia's sub DPS quick swap role suits her very well since her burst is an auto-firing attack off-field and her main role is to use her maxed out skill. She can be used as a hyper carry on-field DPS character within the right team since you can infuse NAs with Geo, but it's only for a short time frame for each skill used, and in comparison to other DPSs we have, especially if you include offensive reactions, her overall damage may not be able to compare. Navia will receive new artifacts that you can grind for, which increases Geo damage by 20% after using an E skill. Having 4 pieces will increase the buff to 50% when you have a shield generated by the crystallized reaction. Alternatively, you can use a Petra set, which acts as a solid damage support for your main DPS. Ayaka has one of the strongest bursts in the game. She excels in freeze teams, highly benefiting from having a second Cryo character to help with energy. Most importantly, the Cryo Resonance will offer 15% crit rate against enemies who are either frozen or inflicted with Cryo status. This makes building her relatively easy as you should use the Blizzard set, which will add an additional 20% crit rate and another 20% if enemies are frozen. You can then can concentrate on building her attack, crit damage, and ER instead of wasting substats on crit rate, which you still need some of, but it just isn't as demanding as other DPS. Ayaka's burst is her primary talent for killing enemies and is very effective for single target situations, but if it misses, which can happen if big enemies move or teleports away, her damage potential drops severely, so it has to hit. You need to make sure you can access her burst every rotation. That's how important it is. Aside from her burst, Ayaka's cryo application is unmatched. This is because of her sprint talent, which is great for traveling across water by the way, but it will infuse her normals with cryo, so instead of relying on a skill or burst to access elemental attacks, she can use it instantly with normals. Ayaka's A1 also increases her normal and charge damage after using her E skill, which is just another AoE cryo attack. Her A4 increases cryo damage by 18% when her sprint hits enemies, so the typical combo would be sprint at enemies, use her E skill, then her burst so you'll gain the energy, then normal attack twice, charge once, sprint at enemies, rinse and repeat the normal attack combo, and then of course use her skill whenever it's ready. The Raiden Shogun excels in electro application, team battery, burst damage support, all while having decent damage herself. So let's first talk about why she can be a great electro enabler, even driver within teams. Just tapping her E skill, Shogun will for 25 seconds cast a coordinated electro attack whenever your team hits an enemy. This applies to on and off field characters. The trigger rate is one coordinated attack every 0.9 second for the party. What's great is that the skill only has a 10-second cooldown, so it's a 100% uptime ability, allowing constant electro damage. Because of the slower elemental infusion, her electro can be amazing for triggering hyper bloom reactions, and is the reason why many players use the Shogun for an all-EM build for hyper blooms. She's also a consistent enabler for superconducts, often being the default ally for Eula teams. Of course, you have the famous Raiden national team, one of the best variations of the national team that is used even till this day to clear hard content. Now, her skill does not snapshot, so it's usually best to use her skill at the start of battle. Her elemental skill also buffs everyone's burst damage, including herself and off-field characters. The buff is based on the individual's energy cost, but this is yet another reason why using her skill first is recommended, unlike her elemental burst, which should always be used as the final attack within a rotation. Elemental Burst does an initial attack, dealing a lot of damage, then transforms all her attacks to Electro for 7 seconds. These attacks are considered burst damage, so increasing her normal attack talent does not increase damage, but her sword attacks restores energy upon hitting enemies. Battery recharge rates is every second, but you can only trigger the recharge 5 times for each burst. So basically, you're recharging up to 12.5 energy to everyone at talent level 10. This doesn't include her A4 passive, which increases her electro damage and energy restoration based on her ER stats. Basically, every 1% above 100% on her ER stats, Shogun's electro damage increases by 0.4% and energy restoration adds 0.6% for her burst. Here's the formula. Typically, you'll have her burst talent at level 10, so 2.5 recharge per hit, and the number of procs, which means how many times you'll trigger the effect, which will usually be 5, which is also the max. The more ER you have on the Shogun, the better the battery effect, but if you don't have her engulfing lightning weapon, Shogun will typically lose out on personal damage if you're using an ER Sans as opposed to attack percentage, but even if you don't have her signature polearm, ER offers burst consistency, which is what you want and is a requirement for the Raiden Shogun. So I always recommend ER, even as it sacrifices some personal damage, but honestly it's up to you. Now, her burst actually increases in damage based on resolve stacks, which can be acquired by using other characters' burst. Her A1 passive also adds 2 stacks when you get orbs or particles, and that effect can occur once every 3 seconds. Shogun can have a max of 60 stacks, and because of this, she can hit pretty hard even at C0. But if you want to see really big purple numbers, get her at C2. The combination of her elemental application, battery, and personal damage makes the Raiden Shogun one of the best characters in the game. In terms of Abyss usage, she has always remained on the top, but she isn't perfect. Outside of hyper blooms, her burst is everything, and this includes majority of her damage. This also forces you to use Shogun on field, which may or may not synergize well with other DPS characters. Even if you are using Shogun as a hyper carry, her damage at C0, though decent, can be lower compared to other main DPS units. For Yoimiya, let's talk about her comparisons with Hu Tao first. Both are great single target pyro characters. Now, Hu Tao will offer the higher damage and is still regarded as one of the hardest hitting DPSs in the game, and if you are after those big DPS numbers or tier lists or the most used character between the two on Abyss, then Hu Tao is the recommended choice. However, there are advantages Yoimiya has over Hu Tao, so don't just disregard Yoimiya. She is far more simpler and easier to play, and she has a tremendous range advantage since her weapon is a bow. Now, I'm not saying Hu Tao is a very complex character to use or anything, but if you don't want to worry about dash and jump cancel, managing her HP and stamina, and just want to shoot enemies with a tap of a button with the occasional aim cancel, then Yoimiya is amazing for her simplicity. So despite the tough pyro competitions, Yoimiya still has a place. You'll typically use her within vape teams, usually with Xingqiu or Yelan, even both if you have them. On top of that, Bennett or Yunjin will act as her damage buffer. Most importantly, Yoimiya will benefit greatly by having a shielder on the team, typically one that won't interfere with her elemental reactions. Reason being is because a slight breeze can knock her down. She's very susceptible to interruptions, therefore shields, though not always required, can help greatly. Yoimiya is a strong single target character, but this can lead to her having problems fighting groups of enemies at a time. Aside from her burst, she lacks a strong AoE. That in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing because she is excellent for boss battles, but when using her for certain Abyss battles can lead to some time lost when compared to other units with powerful AoE attacks. Majority of the time you'll be using Yoimiya's E skill to infuse pyro to her normals. She does have a special charge attack, but it's usually not worth using since the damage isn't high and it's pretty slow charging up. As mentioned before, her burst has an AoE, but it'll also mark one enemy who's caught up in the attack. Attacking the marked enemy with everyone aside from Yoimiya will cause an explosion, another source of small AoE damage that she sort of offers. Killing them will transfer the mark to another target. A1 increases her E skill infused attacks, which connects with her A4 passive. When using her burst, A4 will increase all other team members' attack and will increase further depending on how many stacks Yoimiya has from her A1. Now, if you are using the Shimenawa artifacts, be careful not to recklessly use her burst. You will need 15 energy in order to gain the Shimenawa buff. If you have other pyro characters and can manage to generate energy mid-rotation for her, then you can use her burst first, but if you want to be on the safe side, best use her burst at the end of the rotation if you do have Shimenawa on Yoimiya. Who should you pull for on the 4.3 banners? First priority is definitely the Raiden Shogun. She has remained towards the top in terms of Abyss usage in almost all updates ever since her release. She's flexible in many builds and has a lot of top tier teams. You have the Raiden National team, Hyper Carry DPS, Hyper Bloom teams which remains one of the strongest reactions in the game, and recently a Farina Taser team. So the Raiden Shogun has only gotten better and has been proven to be very future proof. If you don't have her yet, I highly recommend you pulling for her now. Even at C0, she'll be very beneficial. As for the second priority, if for some reason you want to skip the Raiden Shogun or you already have her, then Ayaka would be next. Ayaka has seen a drop in usage rate for endgame content, so basically Abyss, but she's still one of the highest damaging DPSs in the game. An issue is that outside freeze teams, she's less viable compared to others, and freeze teams in general has some limitations. On top of that, if her burst misses, then your damage for that rotation drops severely compared to most consistent DPSs like Nuvalet or Alhaitham. As mentioned before, her cryo application as a DPS is amazing. Only other comparison is Risley, who is a Catalyst user, which is the easiest way for elemental application. Ayaka is a top tier unit, but where cryo stands right now, there are better DPSs and teams you can go for instead. After the Raiden Shogun and Ayaka, both whom I highly recommend pulling for, next priority really depends on what you need. Yoimiya would be the choice if a hyper carry DPS is needed. She is a good unit, especially in vape teams, but she has a lot going against her. Again, she's not bad, but it's because the competition is so fierce. From a pyro DPS perspective, you have Hu Tao, who's still amazing, and Xiangling, though not an on-field DPS character, is a powerful off-field damage dealer. Now, if you want to make a comparison strictly as a DPS unit, that's when Yoimiya falls off hard. You know who the top killers are in this game, and there's plenty of them, so unless you like her ease of use or currently lack a reliable pyro DPS character, there's really no need to waste an equivalent of almost $200 worth of primo gems, free or not, shot just to get her. Again, she is good and can certainly help, but the current on-field DPSs we have so far just outshines her way too much. So Navia is an interesting character to use and has very high skill damage, and I'm sure big number lovers will get that dopamine hit when using her. However, Geo by nature is a defensive element, which is a huge factor as to why some players may not prefer using her. This means she loses out in the elemental reaction department in comparison to other units, as this game heavily favors offensive reactions, more especially for sub DPSs or quick swap playstyles. It's too early to say, but I think we all can agree that Navia won't revolutionize the Geo element. What makes her decent is her splashable role, being able to fit into different elemental teams. What she really offers is just damage, aside from the shield generated by Crystallize, which is not a replacement for shielders or healers. You can give her the Petra artifacts for damage support, but she lacks strong supportive abilities. Navia's role is to add personal damage towards the team's overall damage each rotation, so if you have reliable carries already and need that extra boost in overall damage, Navia can help. If you don't have that on-field attacker, Yoimiya could be a bit more beneficial, but Yoimiya absolutely needs reliable Hydro units for Vape. So comment down below to let me know which character you're pulling for on the 4.3 banners. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for future Genshin and Honkai Star Rail videos. Till next time everyone, good luck on your polls.